All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to True Crime Loser. I hope you're doing well. So, today we're going to talk about Scott Peterson because 2 days ago, the California Supreme Court heard arguments for a new trial, and we'll go over what they chose to argue and kind of how that went later. But first, I want to do a quick little refresher. I would consider the Scott Peterson case as the quintessential circumstantial evidence case of our time. And even if you Google circumstantial evidence on Wikipedia, this is the case that they use as an example. Which is interesting, in my opinion, if this does go back for another trial to see how this all plays out. But let's start at the very beginning. So most of you remember the Christmas Eve of 2002, at least according to Scott. Lacey woke up earlier than him, and then he got out of bed around 8 in the morning. She had eaten a bowl of cereal. He eats a bowl of cereal, and then they both had separate things. She had a few things she wanted to get done. She needed to walk the dog, and he wanted to, quote, pursue a leisure activity. At 8:40, somebody in their household uses the computer and searches for women's clothing and a sunflower umbrella. At 10:40, at Scott's warehouse, he was a fertilizer salesman. Someone logs on, probably Scott, but somebody logs onto the computer at his warehouse, sends a holiday greeting to his boss, and then looks up a how-to guide for set up a woodworking tool that he had recently bought. And then, according to Scott, because it was cold, that he was going to either go golfing or go out on his 14-foot boat out of the Berkeley Marina into the San Francisco Bay. So it was either golf on Christmas Eve or go out in your little boat. And he said that it was a little morning decision, and he chose boat because it was cold. Which, I know it doesn't mean really anything evidence-wise, but I never understood that one because it's always colder down by the water, always colder and windier, and I've lived by the water for almost 10 years, and like I said, it's always colder down there. In the winter, if it's even a little bit windy, it's like, let's walk the other way type of thing. But on a cold day, he decided, you know what, I'm going to go out to the water. That sounds great. And so during that time, a mailman would later say that when he got there to deliver mail, the dog was gone, which could support that she did leave on a walk and it wasn't Scott. Also, a burglar, who I guess was burglarizing the house across the street. I couldn't really find too much information on her, but essentially a burglar said that he saw a homeless person pushing a woman into a van. So those were our two little chunks of information. Scott does his boating, leisure activity, comes back home, does laundry. I always get a little suspicious when it's laundry day all of a sudden when something like this happens, but he would explain that away as most men that go out on the water get salt water on them and on their clothes, and so you would want to do laundry right when you get home type of thing. But as you can remember, Chris Watts did laundry, did the sheets, and so he comes home, does laundry, waits till after 6 p.m. before worrying enough to call anybody, and then instead of calling the cops about his pregnant wife, he calls her family, and then finally they get the cops involved. Like I said, with this one, it's pretty much all circumstantial evidence. There is zero forensic evidence on this one. And was trying to watch just every YouTube video last night about it, and I don't know who it was, but there's a classic clip of some guy going, there's no scratches, there's no fiber evidence, there's no DNA, there's no blood, and there's no murder weapon, as a way to be like, which is true. But let me try to play devil's advocate. So they also say the timeline doesn't make any sense. She's on the computer at 8:40, 10:40, the mailman said the dog. But so if he could strangle her without any scratches somehow, or smother her, that would explain no murder weapon and no scratches. No fiber evidence, which I guess maybe there would be, that you would think there would be a fiber in the boat, but you can't really say, hey, there should be a fiber in their house. That's their house. There's everything they have is in there. Or in his car, there's no blood, if there's no blood, there's no blood. But in a interview, when they were doing the investigation, Scott said something like, well, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they did find blood. Almost like he was surprised there was no blood, and putting in, hey, if there is blood, I don't think it's suspicious, because, which is true. I mean, if you have a little drop of blood in your own bathroom or something, it happens. And so the absolutely zero forensic evidence calls for concern, and is a bit strange. But you don't become the quintessential circumstantial evidence case without having strong circumstantial evidence. So what that is he had purchased the boat, and I think people find it a little strange. Can't put the whole thing on it, but a little strange that he would want to go boating on a cold winter day by himself. And then the obviously Lacey's body was found where he was boating, which that's argued by his new defense attorney and his family, and everybody that really feels like he is innocent is everybody knew his alibi. I mean, that became his alibi. I was fishing, and that was widely reported. And so they're saying anybody that had her or that had killed her and was wondering, oh my God, what do I do with this body? I really blew it this time. Thought, oh, we'll just go put her in San Francisco Bay, and then they'll blame Scott. At first, Scott didn't do any interviews. His whole strategy was like, I want to keep people... I want people to focus on Lacey. I don't want, people focusing on me. And then it turned into, I want to keep the media hungry because they're looking for an interview with me, and we don't want this to fall through the cracks. And then about a month after, so he still hasn't been charged, they still hadn't found Lacey yet, he started doing interviews, a bunch of them. And one of my favorite lines from the interview, one of the interviews I was watching yesterday, is, by this point, a lot of people thought it was him, and so he was getting a lot of questions, being like, you have had extremely suspicious behavior through this whole thing. He had the mistress, the classic... They're at Lacey's vigil, or candlelight vigil, and he calls Amber Fry in the classic, hey, Amber, I can barely hear you. I'm in Paris. Yeah, I'm at the Eiffel Tower. Yeah, I do such cool and romantic things. Yeah, don't you wish that you were standing next to me in this romantic thing? And meanwhile, he's at the candlelight vigil. And I mean, this has all come out. The authorities got into Amber Fry and hooked up her phone with a recorder and recorded all of his phone calls. So by a month later, at this point, he's getting a lot of tough questions, like, if you had told Lacey that you were having an affair, why didn't she tell her best friend or her mom? And he's sitting there like, and a lot, when people are like, why would we think it was, someone else type of question? One of his answers, I like what he says. He goes, if people out there question that, or he's saying, it's not him. If people out there question that, if they would just look at their hearts. He says that over and over again in an interview. Just look at your heart. Even if you think it's me, even if you're sure it's me, just look at your heart. Everyone's just like, okay, what? He goes, just look at your heart and make the effort to bring her home. He takes on the whole attitude of, even if you think it's me, just keep doing what you got to do to bring her home. I can take that. Look at your heart and keep looking. And it's like, I don't know if just looking at my heart is doing anything, Scott. Why don't you, And, okay, so he is in 2005, happened in 2002. In 2005, he is convicted. Well, first he was arrested down by La Jolla, California, Southern California, with bleach blonde hair, camping supplies, $15,000 cash, 4 cell phones, and his brother's ID. Was arrested, trial that went full-on nation paying attention to the whole thing, people out. The day that they read the verdict, there are people out of the courtroom, listening to it and everything, and when they read it, guilty, And so now here we are, 13 years later. Scott's been on death row in, I think, San Quentin prison. Wherever he is, he's very short distance from the Berkeley Marina where he went on the boating trip. If you just could look into your heart, people, it was just a boating trip. And he's been on death row. He gets a cell by himself. He gets a TV and books and art supplies. I saw on Court TV's coverage of this, of the appeal that's coming up, and they had speculated, what are the lawyers going to go after for the appeal? You got to chip away at something. Everybody knew it was going to be the evidence in the case, but what's the strategy going to be? So the Court TV videos were speculating that it would probably have something to do with Scott's lawyers did an experiment where they took a 14-foot boat and a dummy mannequin that's in the shape of a dead body that has the weight of a dead body wrapped in sheets in plastic. They put that in a boat and they went out into the bay and they were trying to show, look, you can't throw a big heavy body out of a boat like this without sinking the boat. So the lawyer's out there and he's picking up the thing and it's rocking and you can tell, and he's trying to get it over, and the water comes up over the side, the boat capsizes, and he's in the water and he's swimming towards the person filming. The problem is anytime a defense lawyer does one of those experiments to try to prove something, they end up looking like the negative portion of an infomercial, like the part where it's like, are you tired of your garden hose tangling? And then it just shows someone with a hose around their neck, and their hair's all messed up, and the lighting is terrible, and everything about the whole clip is just chaotic, my hose sucks. And it's like, well, now the roller hose is here, and it just shows someone well-dressed and clean, calmly rolling up the new hose that they're trying to sell. That's what it looked like to me when he was trying to do the experiment. Are you tired of your boat sinking when you throw your, it just looked like Scott Peterson could have been way stronger than that lawyer. Also, if you have the adrenaline of just murdering your spouse and you're trying to get away with it, you might be able to just get rid of the body. And so they were saying that experiment was not used, the judge said we're not going to use it. And so they're saying maybe they'll bring that up as a reason to be like, look, we need to do a whole new trial. But so the arguments that actually were used was the jurors were brought to the boat at a certain point during the trial, and two jurors were allowed to sit in the boat, and they kind of sat in it and rocked and did a little experiment for their own knowledge and benefit. Well, that's illegal. You can't have jurors there doing an experiment without the defense attorney there. And also, it doesn't really help anything to have a juror sitting in the boat on a trailer, because it doesn't feel the same as it's in the water, and it's pretty meaningless. So that they're arguing that, like, come on, that can't be, this guy got the death penalty. We can't have that riding on some experiment that the juror sat down and was like, this is a small boat. They're saying the mailman and the burglar and the whole, like, homeless man pushing a woman into a van, they didn't call those. That wasn't brought up in the first trial. And so they want those brought up. And then the overall just arching point they had was just the evidence is not there. Not only for the death penalty, but even to keep this man in jail. They're saying the evidence just is not there. And the arguments against that is, as you can imagine, yeah, it is there. It's just circumstantial. The timeline could work if you just, there's just no blood. And I read on NBC put out an article, and it ended with saying we could in reality see Scott Peterson 2, the second trial. Can you imagine? It's like, not only are the cities burning and then we're in dark times, but there's going to be a new Scott Peterson trial. 2020, man. Wild year, but I will be, along with Casey Anthony and Chris Watts, this was one of the cases that I followed as close as you can follow, type of thing. And I actually always just considered he was guilty, and I would watch TV, and then maybe a year or two ago, my sister called me, and she's like, have you ever looked into the Scott Peterson case? And I was like, yeah, I watched the whole thing. And she goes, I think he's innocent. I listened to this podcast that took a really deep dive, and I had only, at that time, I don't even think I was really YouTubing, or everything I saw about the case was just from NBC or TV, and they always it was like a he's definitely guilty type of vibe. So I know that there's a huge percentage of people that do think he's innocent. I think there's still a much bigger percentage that think he's guilty, myself included. And like I said, yeah, we might see a whole nother trial. Wild. But I'm going to cut it off there. I hope you're doing well, and I will see you next time. Why? Stiving why? Shamir.